Welcome to Mobility Conversations, a series wherein we speak to leaders of the mobility industry, seeking their perspectives on a wide variety of relevant subjects. The automotive industry has had to weather quite a few storms in the past couple of years, starting with the slowdown that followed financial year 2018-19, as well as the outbreak of COVID-19 early last year. Sustained efforts by the industry stakeholders as well as government interventions have helped bring about some amount of recovery to the sector. However, concerns remain. In this episode, we have with us Mr. Deepak Jain, who is the president of the Automotive Component Manufacturers Association of India, as well as the chairman and managing director of Lumax Industries. Delighted to have you with us, Mr. Jain. I so appreciate you taking time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much, Dipanshu, for giving ACMA the platform to interact and engage with you.
Wonderful. Mr. Jain, I would start off with the most basic question about the current state of the industry. I mean, in your half-yearly results that you had shared late last year, you had reported a negative growth of 34% as compared to the same period last fiscal. ACMA had also reported massive contraction of component sales to OEMs in the domestic market. How does the situation look now, and how do you look at the situation in the year coming up?
So, Dipanshu, in your opening comments, you did mention that the auto industry in India has been going through a tough time. This has been also pre-COVID. This is obviously not going to be the last slowdown, which we're witnessing, and this has not been our first slowdown as well. However, it's been extremely unique. The current financial year, which is 1920, if you were to see this, we actually 2021, we actually went through the first quarter with zero sales. India was under a lockdown. And of course, the reported numbers for the industry per se for the first half was obviously dismal because you actually did not have any sale of first quarter. And second quarter, you just started to pick up, but there were a lot of vulnerabilities still in the system. I think also I would like to point out that if you were to look at it from 18-19, which a lot of people say is peak year of production as well as volumes and sales, in 18-19 also, the latter part of that financial year, we had already started witnessing some slowdowns, right? And then 19-20 came in a year where the whole industry degrew somewhere around about 17%. And then 2021, where we started off with this whole COVID fiasco. Of course, it has actually taken the industry immense resilience. There has been a lot of collaboration just to pass through these very, very tough and challenging times. We have to understand that eventually we as an ancillary, as the component manufacturers, we have kind of three business segments. One towards our OEM, which is domestic. We have then the aftermarket in domestic, and then we have the export markets, right? And all the three had actually contracted, which made it extremely difficult. We also have to understand that the component manufacturers within ACMA also, who have got about 800 plus members, about 70% are MSMEs. So hence the bandwidth extremely gets stretched because the smaller you are, you probably does not have the financial bandwidth to withstand such volatility in the system. So it's been extremely tough. Good part is that if you just look at it in the H2 of this year, because we were also nearing the festive season, India had started to unlock, there was probably pent-up demand. And obviously H2, you did see vehicles pick up, which eventually meant that the cash flow cycle started to churn in. Of course, there was certain interventions which the government had done on the supply side of it and given certain moratoriums on loans and all that, which actually helped us survive. But I think I would not say that, there are multiple questions still on sustainability of these volumes. Was it just a pent-up demand? We have to be extremely cautious. As we speak today, there is already talks about a resurgence of coronavirus coming in. And we all knew that, how there could be lockdowns or state-wise lockdowns, because the whole supply chain is a very intricate, complex network. One supplier does not actually perform, the whole supply chain can go down. So there has been immense learning, I would say, immense collaboration as well. But we are hopeful that we would get certain volume pickup. But if I were to just answer your question very simply, that how has been this year 2021? Obviously, we will also degrow in 2021. So in 1920, we degrew. In 2021, we will degrow. So I think industry is still having a very, very tough time, and it will take some time and a sustainable, I would say, strategy with all stakeholders to cover the lost ground.
You talked about two very important aspects. One is, of course, the learnings that this whole last year has taught all of us, as well as the power of collaboration in the sector. So when you look back, Mr. Jain, I mean, some of the learnings clearly for the sector has been in terms of the agility that the companies have sort of incorporated, the financial discipline that they have taken up. Now, how deep-rooted do you think is the impact of this virus outbreak on the sector? And how well is the industry really prepared for something similar going forward?
I think not just the sector, I think overall for humanity, I think this virus has taught us a very valuable lesson, that human safety, human health comes at the forefront. In the component or in the auto sector, we've always talked about product quality. We've always talked about safeties. We do an immense amount of resources towards fire safety, human safety. But the health conditioning, we had this whole issue of migrant workers in the industry and manufacturing sectors. So I think there's been a lot of learning which has come in. On the other side, I think we are interacting today on a technology platform, on a digital platform. And trust me, I think in a brick and mortar industry, when you're talking about manufacturing and hardcore manufacturing, where again, MSMEs dominated, I don't think I may say digitalization was a word, but COVID helped us to fast track this whole initiative of digitalization. So I think and that's where I think agility comes in. So definitely there has been a lot of learnings. There have been a lot of pains as well in this whole journey. But I think the key word is collaboration. And I want to actually take a minute to thank our OEMs, our customers, because they had been instrumental in not just hand-holding, but also hearing and engaging. I have never seen such a deep engagement with basically OEMs. I think because of this whole digital platforms, the communication effort stepped up. And with this communication, there was many interventions, starting from probably standard operating procedures. How do we start and make our shop floor COVID ready, COVID free? From also work from home protocols, from even that, let us say, if there are any concerns and headwinds in terms of supply chains, how do we basically collaborate? So there's been an immense learning. And in the same way, I think the government engagement has been fantastic. The governments stepped in, at least deliberated, discussed, not just with our industry, but across sectors. There was a lot of learning, a lot of, I would say, sensitization of what the COVID is happening to be. And I think today, at least we can say we're confident that even with the resurgence coming, at least our shop floors are well prepared, that there's not going to be a shutdown. So I think that's been a true learning, I think true story of resilience. But I think going forward, we need to be very careful that we are able to take these learnings, cost effectiveness, cost down issues. I think every company has actually taken this downturn to actually cut costs, cut corners, take out fat from the system. And we've seen that, I think, I'm a listed entity, and we have seen in many listed entities when they've reported results that in a better sale momentum, keeping the cost in check, actually there has improved on their returns on equity and on profitability. But I hope that there could be many such examples which could actually sustain our way forward.
Interesting. When we look at some of these supply side challenges, one that has actually been the most impactful has been the global semiconductor shortage. How has that really impacted the Indian industry?
Well, the global semiconductor shortage is a global issue. And I think until unless it's globally resolved, it will continue to impact the Indian industry. For some players, it will impact lesser, for some more. I think the whole COVID has also taught us the over dependency on one region needs to be, mitigated. I think risks taking, I would say, ability as well as risk mitigation needs to be seen in a very different light. On a lighter note, there's a standing joke in the industry that what will be the flavor of the month, what kind of new challenge will come in, because over the last, I would say, 12 months, it's almost going to be, I think, 12 months since India went into lockdown. Every month has been a new challenge. And certain challenges which were completely taking the industry and the nation blindsided. So I think this is where, the collaboration and, really working together with all stakeholders of the industry comes actually fruitful, and this kind of communication. But I think semiconductor shortage will continue, it will remain. You have to also understand that globally, India's consumption of semiconductors is very less. Actually, globally, from the auto side perspective, I think we are just consuming of the semiconductor only 8%. The auto industry does. So although say it is less, but as I said, say one part fails, the whole vehicle gets failed. And there have been now even global statements by many OEMs and many auto majors saying that they have impacted this thing, negatively. So I think we will keep on calibrating it. We will keep on working. There are a lot of these semiconductor OEMs as well as manufacturers who are using semiconductors in their products and systems. I think they are looking at various options, how best can be avoided these kind of shortages.
What are some of the other key challenges that you see the industry really facing in years to come?
Well, okay, I think let's understand one of the reasons of these slowdowns. And again, I'm going to talk a bit more pre-COVID, and then I'll come to the current challenges. I think India has a massive potential on mobility. The motorization aspect, including four-wheelers, two-wheelers, it's really not common in India because if you see the penetration levels are extremely, extremely low on any vehicles, if I compare it with any mature market. Now, the issue is that if you were to look about 2 years, the affordability, the price sensitivity, which India is extremely price sensitive market, the cost of a vehicle has dramatically and exponentially increased. And it's been happening over the years, right? The fuel tax has also exponentially risen. So hence, the affordability of a vehicle, this is a challenge today. And I think this is where I think the nation needs to understand that if we really want to grow into a manufacturing footprint, and today the auto sector does have about 45% of the manufacturing GDP comes from this sector, I think we need to really redefine the lens of how we look into this auto sector. There has been very, very clear, I would say, regulations. And I think we all support these regulations which have come in because it's for safety standards, for emission. But I think we need also a very, very stable and a long-term planning, regulatory framework, where we can actually then promote localization. We can promote value add and actually keep on reducing our dependency on import and go with this PM's clarion call of this Atmanirbharta. So I think there are multiple factors which you see that has actually eroded volumes from the auto sector. We need to probably rethink what kind of structural support we need to do for this sector so that we can come back to this. Now, if you talk about particular headwinds which are currently facing, I think and I think I always would look at it as an opportunity and challenge. I think I see one of the biggest, I would say, tailwind would be this whole vaccination drive. But then one of the biggest headwinds is, again, this whole resurgence of, I would say, COVID. And it's hand in glove, right? And we have to really monitor ourselves on this. But I think there are, of course, certain aspects like we have in terms of container shortages, which actually had impacted imports, the inflationary measures, the rise of commodity prices, the shortages of certain base metals, including steel. These have actually hit the sector in terms of having a sustainable, volume growth. Of course, I think we are talking about right now certain other small issues. There have been a lot of announcements by the government, but we are also looking at a very fast rollout and clarity on certain basically announcements which have also happened. So I think these are certain things which, ambiguity comes into the system. And I think, of course, COVID has just taught us is that right now nothing is certain. So we are having certain headwinds. We keep on having certain things which we have not estimated, like semiconductors. It was, if you were to look at it in October, November last year, no one was expecting this kind of a shortage, right? And I think these issues of hopefully temporary lockdowns, all that, that's over. But I think going forward, we still have to be very, very cautiously optimistic to ensure that we are able to meet our customer expectations.
You talked about having the need of having a stable regulatory framework, and also the fact that the government has made some interventions, announcing schemes like the PLI scheme, or the whole the self-reliance program that the PM has been advocating. Plus, there is the scrappage policy that the government sort of talked about. Now, putting all this together, what sort of an impact do you think this would have in ensuring that India returns to a far, a growth trajectory in the future?
No, I think, see, all these measures indicate a very strong intent by the government of India to actually promote the manufacturing sector. And we are very thankful for that, right? And I think if I were to put it in a way where I think today, I think we know that the auto industry is one of the highly taxed industries, right? And we see that both on the product and on the fuel. However, we also understand the challenges of the government, and the rationalization of tax probably needs to be done maybe at a future date. However, these schemes which you've talked about, we can talk about the PLI, we can talk about the road tax schemes, we can talk about the scrappage policies, all show a very, very strong intent to promote the industry. We are actually waiting for the details. Like, for example, road tax. I mean, so although it was announced, we still need to figure out what the rates are, because it does basically impact our exporters who actually need these rates for actually negotiating future contracts. If you look at the PLI, I think we are still waiting for more details. But we are very clear, and I think there was also a lot of deliberations with the government and the industry to ensure that the PLI scheme is structured in a way where we can actually have certain export champions created, which can also actually encourage this whole sourcing and make in India. But I think, the key question remains is that when will the industry be ready for making good investments for the future? And I think for that, I think a very, very clear-cut regulatory framework, a very clear-cut schemes need to be defined, which are long-term stable schemes, right? And I think that will give the industry confidence to actually start investing for the future, be it on localization, be it on certain, I would say, products which could be export worthy, or even for certain, I would say, infrastructure related issues, like, for example, in scrappage policies.
In this whole talk about being self-reliant, what do you think the industry would really need to be self-reliant in all aspects, be it core research, design, innovation? What is it that what did you say about that?
See, I think we have to understand that first, self-reliance doesn't mean looking inward or closing yourselves, right, in a shell. Actually, had the privilege of hearing Dr. Goenka on ACMA's annual session in September. And I think he put it beautifully. I think he said that we need to actually become Atmanirbhar. That means we need to actually improve our competitiveness so that we can enhance India's brand in this global value chain. And I think today also, if I look at the components, we are just less than 1.5%. And why do people, or why we're not able to actually enhance? It's all on competitiveness. These schemes we have talked about, I think this is also helping Indian manufacturing to become more competitive. We know that there are certain disabilities right now we are having. We are short of time, and hence we need to basically also have certain incentivization so that we become competitive. And in the long run, also these incentivizations take away when India actually further improves as a nation on the competitiveness level. Now, looking into a particular manner, I think we need to just ensure that in this whole Atmanirbharta, at least for our sector, if we really need to be self-reliant, we have to work as an ecosystem, right? We need to not only look at our exports, we need to look at localizations where we can be more competitive. There is not a problem in importing, but we have to import the right types of products so that we are able to enhance our global footprint. I think also one very key thing on this whole competitiveness and Atmanirbharta is this whole ecosystem of R&D, this whole ecosystem of engineering. No nation in the auto world has actually become, let's say, number one, number two, number three, unless it has a very, very strong fundamental or innovative culture to promote R&D. And I think here, I think we need to put in a lot more effort of collaborating within the industry per se. We should have these public-private partnerships with academia. ACMA, for example, has actually started its first initiative as ACMA Center of Excellence with basically a partnership with IIT, and we're using their center in Sonipat. However, the intent is that as future trends of mobility will change, we will need to skill up our people. We will need to have a very different type of partnerships like what we not used to have before. And we need to fast track that. So I think multiple things, multiple pronged strategy needs to be taken so that we are able to at least, fast track these opportunities.
So talking about future mobility, Mr. Jain, what to your mind are some of the strongest growth drivers for the industry?
Well, see, if you're talking on the future mobility, fundamentally, I think the government's intent is very clear to go electric. And given India's, I would say, demographics, India's population, and the intent to leapfrog in certain technologies, I think it's a right intent. But we have to see that India is an extremely unique market. We are the world's largest number one two-wheeler producer, the leader in motorcycle. We also have passenger cars, which are small cars, right? And we also have then a very, very strong commercial vehicle footprint, a farm equipment sector. So it's a mix of mobility. And we also have got very, very, I would say, unique dimensions for catering to all these segments and manufacturing all types of products in auto components, be it suspension, be it brakes, be it electricals. So I think from our perspective, I think when you look at future of mobility, India needs to find its own solution. And I think that's where this whole startup culture, that's where, the multiple ways of collecting and collating data is happening. I think ACMA is also trying to become more inclusive. We have been traditionally component manufacturers, but now with this whole future of mobility coming in, I think we need to also see and learn from different, I would say, players, not necessarily in segments, but in the area of mobility, that how it will also impact the components transformation. So I think these are the certain key things. And I think with the growth will come through various opportunities. I think traditionally, there is obviously a market which will continue to grow given the scale of India and given the penetration in India. But I think they're fast tracking it will only come in when we're looking at multiple opportunities. And this whole transformation journey, believe me, is giving out a lot of opportunities. We just need to be financially stable. We need to be stable in terms of policy so that every entrepreneur in the component industry at least has the confidence to invest for the future.
So when we're talking of the global mega trends, Mr. Jain, you talked about electrification making a sort of a head start in India. But there are others as well, be it connected or or shared mobility. Autonomous in India may be still a little far away. But then there are concerns and challenges that the Indian ecosystem has in itself, right? Be it safety, environment, congestion, or even affordability. I mean, that's a point that you made. So how do you look at India or the Indian industry or the Indian mobility ecosystem, sort of approaching the future, keeping all these trends and challenges in mind?
See, I think, as I mentioned before, I think India needs to find its own solution, right? And it always has. And why not just we are talking about case? I mean, say, even when you're talking about electrification, there are so many other types of technologies available, which probably would be India relevant. Like, I mean, say CNG, right? When we talked about transmissions, it was not auto, it was not manual, it came AMT. Right. So I think there has always in India a good success story and measure has always been the balance between the value perceived by the customer and the technology which has been given out. And I think that's where the component industry has been also great, in actually delivering this kind of value system to meet our customer expectations. A lot of innovation needs to be done up as well to meet that. So there are obviously going to be global trends. They will trickle down into India. But we must also not forget in this whole vision of, challenging this future mobility, that we do have a massive infrastructure on the ICE engines as well. And I'll give an example. Usually as an entrepreneur, someone would invest if you're getting a 6 to 8 year return. And now, if someone were to tell me that in 8 years, all ICE engines will actually become obsolete, it's not going to happen. Does India have an opportunity to become the global factory for components of ICE engine for the world? Because maybe in more matured markets, maybe in more developed markets, they may not invest in ICE components because their transition may be a lot more faster to maybe electric or to hybrids. So I think here within ACMA, we have always said that we encourage a technology agnostic platform, a technology agnostic roadmap. I think the best way is that the customer decides on what type of technology it is wanting to buy. Tomorrow, if electric vehicles become cheap, probably more cheaper than the ICE engines, and I mean, say they have no range anxiety or this thing, why not? I mean, so the market may just tip to that. But there could be certain other technologies which also could be available. So that's why I've said that India being a very unique market, a diverse market in terms of segmentation also, I think it needs to find its own place. And I think as component industry, we are very clear on two things. We need to be very, very closely aligned with our customers' needs and try and deliver to the expectation. And second, try and promote a technology agnostic roadmap so that all people in the ecosystem can actually flourish.
An interesting point you make, Mr. Jain. But while we prepare for this transition from a technology standpoint, it is also extremely critical that the manpower involved in the industry is also sort of skilled and upgraded. ACMA has been making a lot of efforts in this regard, but how do you see this whole transition and how do you see manpower really taking that skill up?
I think you absolutely rightly said that the success of this transition will depend on the efforts what we do as a nation, as an industry, to skill, reskill, and upskill our manpower. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities as well as challenges. ACMA, of course, has been always a founder member with ASDC. And in ASDC, we just not have the supply side, we also do have the dealer side and the OEMs. And I think ASDC also just basically completed 10 years, right? A decade. But I think the decade where it completed and the decade which is going to actually happen is going to be extremely, extremely different. And I think we need to actually keep on skilling and need more agility to skill in. And here, I think this, again, private and public partnerships will play an immense role. I know for a fact that there are multiple platforms, and the government's intent also is to create ecosystems where, I mean, say we can actually skill, can actually make certain curriculums. ACMA has been doing that as well for basically skilling. But I think that would be the differentiating factor between success and failure while we're actually transforming into this new era of mobility.
Mr. Jain, finally, as we move to the new financial year, what are some of your concerns or sort of opportunities that you see for the sector?
Well, I think, as I said, the biggest concern remains is sustainability. There is a lot of variability, a lot of volatility still in the system. But I hope that I think that's where the industry is learning and continues to learn that how do we basically cope up with these mechanisms. I think definitely there are multiple opportunities, more opportunities, I think, than challenges, because there is a transformation which is happening, transformation internally because of this whole COVID, as we talked about, this whole digitization, these whole new innovative ways to how do we basically manage our businesses. Then there is obviously this whole transformation of mobility, which is happening, which will give you new technologies. There's a very strong intent by the government to actually localize. And I think that will give us a lot of opportunities to also localize this. And I think we need to just, again, I started off this dialogue by saying that we need to further collaborate and engage a lot more closely with our customers. And I think keep on focusing on one thing is competitiveness, be it on quality, be it on cost, be it on the engineering front. If we keep on focusing on enhancing our competitiveness as a component manufacturer, as someone who continuously does that, I think we would be in a much, much better place than we were yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Jain. On that note, thank you for speaking to Mobility Outlook. We wish you and the Indian industry the very best in the coming year.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.